everyone. Thank you, Chi-Chi. As Chi-Chi mentioned, my name is Christina Shank, and I'm the president of Next OnBoard. I also happen to be an alumni of Emory undergrad as well as the law school, so it's always fun to get back on campus. I always like that. So Next OnBoard is a group of early career professionals whose mission is to increase the number of women in executive leadership and on corporate boards. We partner very closely with our parent organization, OnBoard, who is made up of more experienced career professionals who also share the same mission as Next OnBoard. The three pillars of our organization are really to inspire, connect, and advocate. We inspire women to take leadership, we connect women to opportunities, and we advocate for women. Every year, OnBoard does an annual study, and I'm happy to report that OnBoard's 2017 annual study showed that nearly 25% of open board seats in Georgia were filled by women, up from approximately 20% the year before. Even more, 18 Georgia-based public companies now have 3 or more women on their board. So those are obviously very impressive numbers. Women have made great strides in the past few years, but definitely still work to be done. So that's one of the reasons that we're so excited to be here today, partnering with Alumnae and Women of Emory. As you know, Chi-Chi talked about the mission of Alumni and Women of Emory, and it's very similar to Next OnBoard. And I think that's the reason that we wanted to bring the two groups together to connect and partner for this panel event, and so we can bring our mission to kind of a larger group. Obviously, great turnout today, so thank you all so much for coming. And before we kick off the discussion, I'd like to introduce you all to our distinguished moderator, Marquetta Bryan. Marquetta is of counsel at Nelson Mullins, where she practices in the areas of employment and general litigation. Marquetta also serves on the board of directors for both the DeKalb Symphony Orchestra and Leadership DeKalb, serves as vice president of the board of directors for Georgia Legal Services, is active in Junior League of Atlanta, and was recently named chair of American Cancer Society's Georgia Community Leadership Board of Directors. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Marquetta and the panelists. Thank you very much.
Allison is class of 93, Emory and I am class of 97. She is a board member-elect for DeKalb County School District. I'm happy to work with Allison as general counsel for DeKalb County School District. After working for several years as a school psychologist for Gwinnett County Public Schools, Allison began community advocacy work for her county of residence, DeKalb. She is focused on sexual assault prevention in positions ranging from hotline volunteer to board of directors chair for Day League, formerly the DeKalb Rape Crisis Center. As president of the Junior League of DeKalb County, Allison joined the Leadership DeKalb class of 2007. I'm also a Leadership DeKalb graduate. She is currently on the board of directors for Leadership DeKalb. I served a lot with Allison. So we see each other. You see a trend here. Her passion for children led her to work on the Partnership for Community Action Board for the DeKalb Juvenile Court, Judicial Citizens Review Panel, and the Board of Directors for DeKalb County DFACS. Because she also has 2 children in DeKalb County Schools, she's spent many years focused on public education advocacy. She's also served in various positions in local school PTAs and school councils. Allison clearly has a passion for education, which led her to be elected without opposition to the DeKalb County Board of Education. So thank you, Allison. Next here to me is Jill Ratliff. She's the president and CEO of Empower House Leadership Consultancy. She served as executive vice president at Assurance Specialty Property, which is a $2 billion financial services organization, so no small feat here. Jill has more than 20 years of Fortune 100 human resources management experience. She's held key senior positions, such as executive vice president of human resources for ING North America, director of leadership development for ADP, of corporate human resources for PepsiCo's Taco Bell Corporation. She began her career as sales director for Dow Chemical Company. Her strength is in making the complex simple and straightforward, which is something that we all need to do. Jill provides thought leadership and execution of people and culture initiatives that align to help drive exceptional business results. In the community, Jill currently serves as the executive committee for the board of directors for Junior Achievement and is also the co-president for Emerge, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering women by advancing their education. Thank you, Jill. And last but not least, thank you. We have Lizanne Thomas, who is a partner at Jones Day, where her roots are as an M&A lawyer, mergers and acquisitions. Lizanne practices, teaches, and lives corporate governance as the head of the firm's corporate governance team. She participates in about 100 board meetings per year, which is more than I can handle or stomach, as counsel to a number of public companies. She represents special committees in control and conflict transactions, as well as in internal investigations. Lizanne is experienced in shareholder activism, public and private mergers and acquisitions, takeover preparedness, and executive compensation. She also lectures on governance to leading business organizations, companies, and universities. She has served on boards of directors for 3 publicly traded companies, including Atlantic Capital, Popeyes, Louisiana Kitchen, and Krispy Kreme Donuts. Is there a trend there? At Krispy Kreme, she co-chaired a special committee charged with investigating a variety of allegations against the company. Lizanne is also a trustee of the Georgia Research Alliance, serving as the chair of the audit committee. Thank you, Lizanne. So I am happy to be able to facilitate, like I said, an intimate conversation with these great panelists, and then we'll leave some time at the end for some questions. So if you have some things that you want to ask, please make sure to jot those down so that we don't miss anything, but they have a lot of information that they are ready to share with you today. So we are all here because you think you want to serve on a board, or you do, and I don't know if after this you will be persuaded or dissuaded. So we'll see what happens. So I will just throw out some questions and talk about this, but I will tell you that I have given about 20 FaceTime hours to board service this week. And that does not include the time that I had to turn down for board service, and that also does not include the in-kind donations that I've given to board service this week. So one of the things that I want to ask is, and this will jump ahead and then we'll get a little more basic, is what is the time commitment for serving on a board? And I ask that question first because when you're thinking about anything, you think about, do I have the time to do it in my life, right? And I'll just throw that out to anybody.
Is this on? Can we first give a shout out to the one guy in the room? It's a brave and honorable man. Thank you for being here. These are issues common to us all. I think it varies wildly and widely about how much time it takes to serve on a board. When I joined the Krispy Kreme board, as you heard about, and I'm sorry I didn't bring donuts, I should have. The special committee work that I did was incredibly intense, and what I calculated was that I spent about 1,000 hours in my first 6 months working on that. Now, for those of you who are lawyers and keep track of your time, lawyers kind of target 1,800 to 2,000 billable hours a year as sort of a full-time work commitment. And so to do 1,000 hours on what was supposed to be additive to my day job, that gives you a sense of exactly how demanding it was. That's an extreme, there's no question about it, but I do think what you're going to hear from all of us as panelists is in for a penny, in for a pound. If you sign up for it, you really need to contribute, and if trouble comes from some unexpected area, you've got to find a way to make that service be fully fulfilled. For the most part, I tend to think that it's sort of like the homework rule that kids are told and never adhere to. It's about 2 hours of preparation for every 1 hour of a meeting, because there's just that much extra to do. And it's not just about the meetings, it's about being an advocate for the organization, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, at all times. So that's my first perspective on it.
I agree with that. Anything from you? Okay.
So first thing I do want to say, though, not to add to that, is women are on the move. So good for you guys that you're here. You should clap. Come on, seriously. Because, and I obviously you're going to catch a little passion coming from this end of the equation here. And part of it is, I just had my 60th birthday and I'm over it. I say what I think. So for those of you that aren't there yet, I'm giving you permission to start way earlier than 60. And I'm also going to say that I think the fact that you're even thinking about leadership and board service, whether you actually go board-wise or whether you lead in some other way in your community, in your company, you step up to the plate, like do it, like get in the river, because women are on the move and we need to be, because this world needs more of us in leadership roles. So congratulations to all of you.
Thank you. And not only are women on the move, but women are needed at the board table, because we all know decisions can't be made without women being there, right?
By the way, on the hours thing, the only thing I would add is find out, like, if it's a working board, you know, because some boards have paid board staff and boards of directors, and they do a lot of the work, and other boards are working boards, which means you're on the board, like you're also taking responsibility for a whole stream of work. So you really have to understand, you know, what kind of a board it is and what's the expectations for that board.
And we may touch a bit on the different types of boards, but you're absolutely right. There are working boards, advisory boards, paid boards, and so some of that will make the difference. So I'll go back to a more foundational type of question. And if you saw us at our very VIP table over here in the corner, Jill gave us a great analogy of thinking about how you plan with intentionality. You want to serve on a board, but how do you do that? How do you get there? So I will pose the question to you always, if you want to serve on a board for the first time, how do you do that? Most of the time, it just doesn't happen overnight, that you get a cold call from somebody saying, your picture on LinkedIn looks great, we want you on the board, unless, I will tell you, you've got some really super high profile job where you're gonna give all the money, but most of the time, it doesn't happen like that. So how do you make this happen the first time?
Sure. I would say jump in by volunteering. So if there's an organization you're interested in my case, it was DeCabre Crisis Center, which is now called Day League. I started volunteering there when I was a student here at Emory, and moved away for graduate school, came back, kind of got linked back in with them, and ended up on their board and then chairing their board. The key that I usually tell people, this is super simple, if there's one thing to remember, just do what you say you're gonna do. If you do what you say you're gonna do, all the way from when you're an entry-level volunteer, all the way up to board chair, then people will come after you and ask you to do more and take higher positions and be a leader. Someone told me early on, you don't really need to plan out your board service, because once you prove yourself as a volunteer, you'll probably get pulled onto a board, and then your service on that board will lead to another board, which will lead to someday, they didn't say this, but elected office. So just do what you say you're gonna do. Even if it's within your skill set that you have from your professional employment, great. If it's not, figure it out and just do what you say you're gonna do. And honestly, I think that they will love you and you will be asked to come on the board, because it's amazing how often in the volunteer world people do not follow through on what they say they're gonna do, unfortunately. So do that and you're golden, I think.
The addition that I'd make is, I think when you direct yourself towards a nonprofit organization, please make sure it's something you actually have a passion about, and not just something where you think it's expedient because the board looks like it has some people you'd like to get to know. If it's your passion, then you will deliver on that passion and do exactly what Allison just said, which is fulfill expectations, then exceed expectations, and then things will expand. But it's critically important. Don't just sign up for the sake of signing up.
The last thing I would add is it's a marathon, not a sprint. So from where you are, if you're even thinking forward and there's some reason why you're drawn to that, you start in the nonprofit area. Don't even have like your sights on a paid board yet, because you really don't even know enough to even think about that. And now some of you, that may not be true. You may be in there may be a small company or small business, and I'm not talking about that so much, but start with nonprofit, like my esteemed colleagues here are saying, and get involved in something you like, and even try to see what it's even about before you leap too far, and know that it could be 10 or 15 years. You could start volunteering on a nonprofit board next week, and 15 years from now, you could be on a paid board. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And take your time with that, and just grow as you go.
Thank you. That's a great segue into my next question, because I'm sure the panelists, like myself, have given more no's to board service than they have to yeses and acceptances. Because every board is not a good fit for you. And whether we're speaking about passion or the organization of that board or the mission, how should someone determine what is a good fit and what are the warning signs to stay away from when selecting what board you want to serve?
Again, I would go back, and I think where we started. One, you have to look at the amount of time you have to give. Two, you have to look at what I would say is your why. Like, why are you even thinking this? Why do you even want to do this? And get really clear about that. And then look for something that you actually feel a deep commitment to. So I think start there. And then personally, I would start local. So I would look at something that, you know, again, is in your neighborhood or in your community or in your industry or your field, something close into what you do, because then, you know, you're going to be able to walk before you run if you do that. So I would stick to start nonprofit. If you have no board experience, go that way first and just put a pause button on the idea of a paid board for a little bit and then work your way.
The other idea that I would encourage you to consider about a board that you wouldn't want to serve on is you need to do your due diligence. So somebody reaches out to you and says, you've been a great volunteer with XYZ nonprofit. We'd like you to consider board service. I think what you can do is you can, if you're interested, express enthusiasm, but make sure you meet a number of the other board members. There often are times that particularly smaller nonprofits are the cause celeb of one particular individual who's absolutely passionate about this particular cause, and what he or she says, he or she expects to be the outcome. And so they treat the board as what I call a necessary nuisance. Maybe some financial contribution, but frankly your input otherwise is not that welcome. And you really need to test that, because otherwise you're going to be hitting your head against a brick wall. So meet more than one director. Ideally meet all of the rest of them. Make sure you meet with the management team. And then in addition to that, the other kind of due diligence that you want to learn is you want to learn the financial stability of the organization. There may be times that you decide to go toward trouble, all right? I joined the Krispy Kreme. I'm not going to talk about it every time here, but I made a decision to go towards trouble there. The company had really hit a wall. And the reason I made the decision to go towards it was because of the people I met on the board and the other candidates they were considering. I knew that they cared about their own reputation and doing things properly as much as I did, and that made me decide that we could address those troubles successfully together. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't talked to them all and made sure that I was surrounding myself with people of integrity. So some due diligence is absolutely the right thing to do. Doesn't mean you absolutely have to avoid trouble, but just make sure you've got people who have common values with you before you do it.
I would actually, that is so true. Along those lines, it just triggered a memory. When I was a baby board member volunteer, I was getting some training through Junior League, which is an organization that trains women in board service to go out in the community and be leaders. And one of the very first things I learned from them is just the basics of what your universal duties are as a board member. So this is for a corporate board, an elected board, a nonprofit board, and you can look this up, but there's the duty of care, duty of obedience, duty of loyalty. And I learned really early about the importance of that, and the fact that people on a board, the duty of care is, you have to do everything that you can for that organization as you would, and as a reasonable person would for an organization. Duty of loyalty is putting the needs of the group ahead of your own personal needs, calling out conflicts of interest, that kind of thing. Duty of obedience is following the rules, following the guidelines, following the bylaws. So those three things were sort of drilled into me at an early stage in my leadership development. And when I've said no to board service, it's been and I haven't told them this, but it's because of what they're saying. When you do your due diligence on a board, and you meet with people on that board, and you hear what it's like, what their priorities are, do those people uphold those duties? And if they don't, it's probably not going to be a successful experience for you. So I would definitely say do your due diligence on the people on the board itself, and take a look at what the duties of a board are. Kind of get that in your mind so that you're going into something that is high functioning and able to push forward the mission in a successful way, and you won't end up sued somewhere down the road.
So Marquetta, Allison just put us to shame because you and I are practicing lawyers, and she just gave the best legal lesson that
But that was my next question.
Well, before you jump from that, maybe this is too obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you're going to go towards being on a board of a nonprofit, bring your checkbook.
We will talk about that as well.
They love you, but they want your money.
They love your money. They love you too. My husband has said that we actually need a budget line item for my board service, and I actually have one. But we'll talk about that. I'd like to start with Lizanne, and can you just foundationally give us just a primer on the difference between nonprofit boards, for-profit boards, and corporate boards?
Sure. I'm happy to. You got a great lesson here. One thing that doesn't distinguish nonprofit and for-profit boards is this concept of the board duties. So the duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, is also something called a duty of disclosure that you have to think about. Disclosure there just means make sure that if you have a conflict, you've informed everybody else. Those duties are fundamental and embody something called the fiduciary duties that a director owes to the organization. In a for-profit setting, what the law has said is that your mission is to oversee the management of the company. You don't become management, but you oversee it. Think of it as a coach, kind of, or some kind of supervisory. One of the phrases I like to use is the acronym NIFO or NIFO, noses in, fingers out. Okay, so management is management, and you are providing some oversight. All right, there are times in a time of crisis when you might get busier, but and a little bit more intimately involved in the actual operations. But for most of the time, you're providing encouragement and challenge to management. That's in the for-profit setting. Everything I've just said works in the not-for-profit setting. The biggest difference is that as a for-profit director, your duties are to the corporation and to its stockholders, all right? Those who've invested in the company. And at all times, you have to think about what is in the long-term interest of those stockholders. And if you fail to do so, or if the market perceives that you have failed to do so, you can get sued. All for-profit corporations usually have very good indemnification and insurance that will protect you against that. But there's very clearly a constituency that if unhappy, they'll come after you. So that's something to think about. When we turn our guidance to, or turn our lens to the nonprofit world, in the nonprofit world, your duty is really to the cause. Now, your particular nonprofit corporation may have members, and the theory is those members might have standing to sue or to question your decision making. But more fundamental even than members is the nature of the cause. Now, interestingly, let's bounce back to the for-profit world. In the for-profit world, there are all sorts of entities and organizations set up to ensure that the right things are done. So they're regulators of a sense. Coca-Cola files reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and so there are companies like that where we have regulations that would regulate what happens. In the nonprofit world, the only regulatory scheme is quite superficial, and it's from two categories. One is, believe it or not, the tax code. All right, because you're not profit and you don't pay taxes, the entity doesn't pay taxes. The IRS has taken it upon itself to monitor and oversee issues that, in my opinion, have absolutely nothing to do with the core mission. But the IRS was the only federal entity that really had a hook onto a nonprofit. So adhering to the tax laws, making sure that you're doing things appropriately there becomes important. The area where the IRS is most focused is on excessive compensation. Not for you as directors of a nonprofit, because you're not generally paid, but for management. And that hails out of some pretty notorious comp practices that applied to United Way and Red Cross 10, 15, 20 years ago. So compensation of management becomes something important that they look at. So the IRS is one entity that looks at nonprofits. The other entity technically is the state attorney general, who would have a right to intervene if he felt that your cause was being subverted because you're all spending all the money on parties instead of what your ultimate cause is, okay? So your enforcement entities are different, but the themes are all the same. We could talk a little bit more later about the paid boards and sort of the corporate world, but fundamentally, Allison just gave you a better legal lesson than I just did, that in both instances, what you need to pay attention to is do your homework, don't approve anything you don't understand, and to the extent that you also have an affiliation with another party that's doing business with your nonprofit cause, that is potentially a conflict of interest, and what you have to do is disclose it and go through some steps to figure out the degree of involvement you should have with that issue. Clear enough? Those are really the differences.
In short summation, there is some risk associated with board service. Once all the feels are gone and the frills are gone of I feel good and I'm helping puppies and bunnies and serving hospitals and things, there is some risk. So you really want to be an informed board member.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we talked a little bit about what's your why? Why do you want to be on that board, or a public board, or a nonprofit board? But we didn't talk about why would they want you? And I think back to some of the things Lizanne just said, on a nonprofit board, right, they want you for financial support, one. They want you for your passion for their cause, and they want you for some kind of subject matter expertise that they think they need to advance their cause, right? So that's over there. And you guys can weigh in on this, but on a public board, oh, it is your next, okay. So we can, do you want me to pause then?
So yes, just so I can get out, essentially as Jill is starting to tell you, there are certain skill sets that are necessary to board service, and we know that, of course, finance and legal and certain skills are very attractive to boards. So I'd like for you to tell us in your experiences in knowing about boards, serving on boards, when you all are considering new board members, what are those desired skill sets? What are boards looking for?
And what I was gonna say about that is they fluctuate, because in a for-profit board, it depends on where the company is in the evolution of their business model. So they may be looking for board members because strategy into a whole area they've never been in before. So they're gonna be looking for people who have done that already before to come in, right, in that case. You may find a company who knows they're gonna be facing major merger and acquisition issues because of their strategy in the coming years, and they're gonna be looking for that. You may have an organization who knows they have to overhaul their talent strategy and they gotta do a lot of work in talent, and they might be looking for somebody who has that background. So part of it is that's gonna fluctuate, but they are looking for something, and you have to know, sort of what your subject matter expertise is, and you have to be extraordinarily confident about that. And it has to be a fit to the board. And then the other thing, for me personally, I think for-profit boards are looking for people with a black book. They're looking for people who are highly networked, who know people that they can tap and bring into the organization and make introductions to the CEO or the head of sales and marketing. They're looking for you to advance their market and their business development. So if you're somebody who, again, has spent your career and you're very well networked and you know a lot of people and you're well respected, then that's going to be hugely attractive to a board.
One of the biggest mistakes I ever made in my life was as a young lawyer. I was invited to join the Planned Parenthood board here in Atlanta. I was really excited about that. I believe in the cause. That was great. I was so utterly naive about what was expected of me as a not-for-profit board member that after I attended a couple of meetings, I kind of said, all they ever talk about is fundraising. And And, you know, I'm a first-year lawyer, second-year lawyer, I've got student loan debt and whatnot. I was like, I can't believe we're not talking about the cause and, you know, getting out there and doing stuff. And now I look back on it and think, that was my mistake. That wasn't their mistake. What a lot of nonprofit boards do, as Jill correctly said, is you do need to bring your checkbook. There is an expectation that as board members, you 100% of you will contribute, and at a sizable level. It is not irrational if somebody reaches out to you for you to say, can you give me, just from a planning perspective, what sort of expectation do you have about my annual contribution as a board member, and let them talk to you about it. Sometimes it's perfectly appropriate, and this is what I should have said when I was a first-year lawyer on Planned Parenthood board. What I should have said was, you know, I'm passionate for the cause, I'll do anything that you need to do, but my ability to contribute is going to be modest and hopefully can increase, but it's going to be modest. You really need to think about whether or not I'm the right person. I wish I'd done that. I didn't, and it was my miss. The other thing that is looked for in nonprofit worlds is for that sort of connectedness. What they want is a board of people ideally with recognized names, recognized experience, the ability to network and help with respect to the cause, and yes, with respect to fundraising. On the for-profit side, there's a much more methodical approach to skill sets, because in the for-profit world, you absolutely have to have some people who have financial statement expertise. So for those of you who are majoring in accounting, bully for you, that's going to help. There's compensation and human resources expertise, there's technology expertise, lots of things like that public company boards look to, and they do a very careful assessment of members that are rolling off the board and the skill set that they need to bring in. They focus on diversity and are always looking to enhance that as well. So there's a skills development piece in the for-profit world, and they want people at the top of their game. The gospel used to be, we only want CEOs on our board, which was pretty much an assurance at the time, not so different now, that it would be a bunch of white guys, right? So they're moving away from that, and that's good. What I want you also to know is in the nonprofit world, they're modeling after the for-profit world in a lot of ways. They're making sure that they do have sophisticated people regarding financial statements. So they have an audit committee. They frequently have some of these other committees that you typically only saw in the for-profit world. So not-for-profits are getting sophisticated about that, and that's one of the things you should pay attention to.
I would just say I was in a similar position to Lizanne, coming out of graduate school with tons of debt and like being intimidated about the financial aspect of nonprofit boards. And what I found is that they're usually willing to be creative with you in terms of that financial contribution. It doesn't always have to be, some of it does need to be from your pocketbook. I mean, because they need to write grants, and they need to be able to say 100% of their board has financially supported. So I'm not going to say there's not any of that, but I mean, I can remember them saying, we'll take $50 for your annual contribution, go find us a sponsor for our Take Back the Night race. You know, go, find us somebody to sponsor some. Basically bring in some revenue sponsorship in some other way, and that's fine. But you do need to ask about that. In terms of my experience with local nonprofit boards is that they are often looking for somebody who is not afraid to ask for money. They want, because everybody's afraid to ask for money. Most people do not like to do that. So if you're someone who's comfortable, making cold calls or calling, somebody who served on that same board 20 years ago or whatever, asking for money, they want that. They want people who are comfortable making those calls. They like people who are savvy on social media and marketing. Because a lot of boards have people that have been on there for years and years, and they're not quite up to date on, their Insta or whatever. So they're looking for people who know how to do that and promote, what's going on. They're nonprofit that way. They're often looking for attorneys. They're often looking for people who could be treasurers, so the finance background. I will say I was none of those. So I can't say I used any of that to get in, but I can tell you I think it's easier maybe for people who come at it from that angle, just local nonprofits.
I just certainly like to say that Allison is a lot more hip on social media than I am, because Insta is not something I've ever said.
Insta, which is a fake Insta.
I don't know what that is. So I have several other questions that I could ask for these ladies, but right now I'd like to open it up to you to ask questions. Does anybody have any questions of our panelists? Yes.
I do have a question regarding the education needed to be able to navigate that space. And I've been reading that a lot of universities are offering courses and how to be well-versed on what goes on governance and things like that. What's your perspective on, do we need to get on formal education to be able to serve on board?
Did everybody hear the question? Anybody?
About education, it's about education to be able to serve on board.
So,
That we need it, and what's the value of that?
so the question is whether or not some kind of formal education to make you capable of or better prepared for board service is a good idea. And the answer is education is never a bad idea, right? The question is what kind of education and how do you deploy it? And I've got a sort of a second thought I want to raise. I hope what you're hearing is that for nonprofits as well as profits, having some financial acumen is really, really useful. And so if that's never an area that you've studied, but you've got one extra elective before you graduate, or I guess we're all alums here, or you're in a graduate school program, I would look at external education that gives you some kind of financial savviness. Some of it's just vocabulary, and you just need to have some walking around comfort in that. It wouldn't hurt you with respect to either path of board service, so I think that's a good idea. And being educated on the role, I think, is a good idea. And it would be a credential that you should mention, on your bio. One moment on bios and then another on day jobs, if that's okay. On bios, you shouldn't just have, and I'm not the expert on this, Jill probably is, one single bio doesn't fit for everything. You should have a bio that's directed at board service. You should have a bio that's directed at one particular area of your expertise and a bio that's another. I think that's tremendously important. Even today when I was hearing Marquetta read my bio, it's the one that's online, and I'm like, I need to improve that. But so think about that. But let me talk about another thing that I think is tremendously important. Your day job can be additive to your interest in board service, just like your board service can be additive to your day job. And it's tremendously important that you work with your boss or your mentors about this, because there might be, for example, the Home Depot, if any of you are employed by the Home Depot, has very specific nonprofit causes that it supports that relate to housing and the environment, things that would make sense given that the Home Depot is the Home Depot. And if you found yourself getting involved with an organization that aligns with your corporate mission, you're not going to be pushing against what your employer expects you to do, but they're going to see that as additive for you career-wise, all right? And the connection, the Home Depot example is a really easy one, but you can see how that helps in both directions. So in short, yes, take any education that you can. I think had I done that, to me it's an irony that I've ended up being a boardroom lawyer when I was obviously so clueless 36 years ago. But so I think any form of education that you can get would be great. There's a lot of external programs that do this kind of education, a ton of them.
Like OnBoard?
OnBoard would be one.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
I have a question. boards that you've been serving on. I'm just curious, have you been witnessing a growing diversity on boards as you've been participating in them, or are you finding yourself still many times a lone woman in a room full of non-diverse folks?
Allison, would you like to
Well,
answer?
in nonprofits in Atlanta, I think they've been better than the corporate world as far as women go. So I've served with lots of amazing women. I will say they've struggled with ethnic diversity. I know many boards have done a better job with Asian Americans, Black Americans than they have with the Latina population. They, like Junior League, for example, there's, in DeKalb County, there's a huge Latina population, and so there's been outreach for years to these women, and it's really hard. So I would say there's been an awareness of the need for diversity on nonprofit boards for a long time. There's been a lot of outreach going on. Has there been a significant change? Maybe, but they want it. I mean, I think most boards would tell you they have a lot more work to do on that.
And I would say the same thing, and I think there has been, in my sense, and again, I led a lot of human resource, sort of functions, so I live in that world of talking and thinking about those things. And I think there is a lot more outreach, meaning we know we need that and want that. What I would say to all of us in this room is there's gotta be a lot more reach back. There's gotta be a lot more like you going after that, not waiting to be asked. There's gotta be a confidence factor that we start getting that say we don't wait for our seat at the table, we go get a seat at the table. And so I think that's an opportunity for us as women to think about. If we're always just saying, well, they don't have it yet, or nobody's ringing my phone, that shouldn't stop you. You gotta put yourself out there and go get what you want.
And I'll just add to that certain boards are certainly looking at the diversity of the board makeup with intentionality, but that's certainly not all of them. So I sit on several nominating and executive committees, and I do look at the entire board when I'm considering a nominee, as to we have this diversity represented, this ethnicity, this gender, we don't have, and there's so many different combinations. We're not just talking about race and gender when we're thinking about this. And so I look at all kinds of things in that, but that's certainly not everybody. And the second thing that I'll add to that is, and Lizanne mentioned this a bit, is just how you package. So you may have great work skills, and I'm sure everybody's got some great professional skills, but those don't always translate well into board service. And so as she mentioned, have several bios. I think the one that was read for me is have an online bio as well. I probably have no less than 18 bios. They are numbered. But there's certain spaces that I move in the political realm and certain things, and so they look very different, but they are all very factual and accurate, and they are my service. But I am necessarily given the information that's germane to whatever I'm putting that bio out for. So you should do the same thing with your professional service as well. How do you package that so that your skill sets that you have, and really do a deep dive into the things that you've done over the years. Sometimes when I sit down to update those bios, I forget the things that I have done. So I actually keep a tracker, and this may sound odd, but I keep a tracker of successes and wins, and if I've done a budget really well or an audit, and I think about that. So do that, and then kind of think about what board skill sets are needed. As Jill said, don't wait for someone to come to you, but if you've met somebody in networking, or there's a board that you're interested in, reach out. What type of skill sets are you looking for? Am I someone that you might be interested in?
You just said something that we should just touch on for a second. You said networking. If you're uncomfortable networking, that's the skill set to start working on first. Because you really, one, it'll build incredible confidence, in yourself. And two, you'll learn a lot. I mean, if you have an interest in networking and you get comfortable with that, your learning curve is gonna go like that, because you're gonna meet a lot of interesting people. Like if we sat down and had the chance to meet all of you in the room and talk about who you know and what you know, our collective IQ point would go through the roof in here. So get comfortable. If you're not comfortable with networking, get comfortable with it, and then you say, well, how? I'm shy, I'm not really good at that. It's just a skill, you guys. The more you practice, the better you'll get. It's like golf. Maybe not like golf, because I practiced a long time and I still suck. I'm sorry. But point is, it's just a skill. Like, if you're not good at it, you're uncomfortable, just tell yourself, twice a month, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna go to lunch with people I don't know, or I'm gonna have coffee, or I'm gonna put myself out there. And it'll help tremendously to build that confidence.
There's one other piece of your question that I wanted to answer. Wellesley did a study, and some of you have heard me speak before, I think, and this study is one of my favorite ones to mention. It's got a little age on it now, but it was on the concept of the power of three. And what we are finding is that in a boardroom, one woman affects change, but it's singular, and she becomes or this is true for diversity as well, sort of the embodiment of, she speaks for all womanhood, right? With two people, it becomes a club. What do the gals have to say, or what have you? When you have three, the atmosphere fundamentally changes. And the power of three is really something that I think we need to be looking for now. And I think you can look at that expansively. One of the boards on which I serve has 2 women and then a gentleman of color. And the 3 of us, we're not all aligned on views, but I will tell you there is no question but that we changed the way the conversation takes place in the room. The power of 3, it's really huge. So when you are serving on board, look to bring about that kind of change. I hope that's responsive.
It's also, I'm number 3 on the DeKalb County School Board. I mean,
Yes,
it's coming off, I'm glad to hear that. That's right, baby.
Questions?
So my question is actually specific to Allison. I also have children in DeKalb County, and I've been active in the PTA, DeKalb Council PTA, band boosters, football boosters, that kind of thing. But I would like to move further in being involved with education, so I wanted to know how you were able to do that, and also how you, since PTA does give us a lot of skills, how you were able to use those skills to get to where you were.
That's a great question. And my path was a little bit unique. I mean, what happened with me is I started at my local school, but I very quickly became interested in county-wide issues, regional issues, state issues, kind of started paying attention to the bigger picture. And I was asked to go on the board of the Emory La Vista Parent Council, which is a regional group of parents that try and look at the big picture issues. There is a Tucker Parent Council and a Peachtree Gateway Parent Council and a South DeKalb Parent Council. And I would say those are really good next steps to start going to their meetings, talking to their officers, to look at the bigger picture issues. But the place that really, I think, helped me turn a corner in terms of the big picture of DeKalb was, I don't know if y'all are DeKalb people, but you might remember that our school board got yanked out of their seats by the governor several years ago. That happened at a time that I was paying attention to the district issues, and I started going to meetings with people from across DeKalb that were interested in that specific topic, and started networking with them and, you know, hearing, gosh, we all have the same concerns. Maybe we should get ourselves together and talk about this. So we pulled these officers from, I said, I'll go get my Emory La Vista Parent Council people, you get some South DeKalb people, we'll get Tucker, we'll get Dunwoody, and let's all come together and discuss what's happening with our school board and what we need to have happen. So we had we called it a summit at the time. It was supposed to be a one-time summit. We all met in Decatur, and it went so well that the people said we need to continue this. So it became a grassroots parent advocacy organization called Parent Councils United that still exists today. And the mission is to bring together parents from all over DeKalb County to advocate for all of our students. So I'm telling you that because I actually think Parent Councils United would be a great way if you're interested in those, the big picture issues, the DeKalb County schools for all students, not just, one region or one area. Parent Councils United is a great way to get involved, and I'm happy to talk with you afterwards to hook you up with people, but it's a really, really good way to take that next step to the big picture kind of level.
I'm so glad we have women like you and Allison in DeKalb County. That's awesome.
It was not me, the group was awesome.
So important.
I think we have a question here.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of books
most of mine are pretty highly technical. I think any book that you find that is gonna, so I don't have a specific recommendation for you. What I would say is any books on the topic are going to add value because you're gonna learn vocabulary. I just can't tell you how important that kind of thing is. So I would just go that route. I've got a number of books on my desk from people who've written things, and I think you have to take some of it with a grain of salt, in the sense that not all of them are going to capture the universe perfectly, and it's always going to be kind of a point of view, but you're going to get that vocabulary and you're going to get that exposure, and I think that's good. There are a number of blogs that I think are worth following. I don't know if you have a legal background, but the Harvard blog on governance I think is really, really good. I don't agree with them all the time, but they at least frame the issues fairly. And that'd be probably the one that I would chiefly recommend.
I would just add to that, and I also don't have a particular book recommendation for you, but in terms of general areas, I would look at strategic planning topics, board governance, of course, if you don't have that background. And one of the things I'll add to that is self-learning on a board is not only essential, but it's just a great thing for you to do. But we know when you're looking at a mission-oriented service, you can read 100 books, but to be an effective board leader, you have to show up and do more. So most boards will meet, say, quarterly, and there'll be some other work, but if you really want to get involved in leading the mission effectively, you have to go and find out what's going on behind the scenes. What can I do beyond these quarterly board meetings? What committees can I serve on? Can I help with the strategic plan? But there's a lot of work that has to be done. And so I think doing those things concurrently is very helpful.
I just remembered one, boardsource.org is a great resource for nonprofits.
I was thinking BoardSource is excellent, and sometimes there are organizations like, I've mentioned Junior League before, Leadership DeKalb, Leadership Atlanta. Every once in a while they'll have events that are open to the public that are leadership training workshops, so keep an eye out for those. They also have new leader incubators. In DeKalb it's called Emerging Leaders of DeKalb. Atlanta has one, I think Fulton has one too. So I'd keep an eye out for those and go to their workshops that are open, or even go ahead and go through their classes.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about the books, I'm a huge book advocate. My husband says to me, honey, library. You can rent them and take them back. You don't have to buy all of them. But I'm a bookaholic, and so I'm a huge believer in read books because you're going to learn a lot, particularly once you're out of school. But that all being said, I will tell you this, and this is true about life, I think. We know more than we can do already. So sometimes it's not about more knowledge. Life is 80% experiential and 20% what you know. So don't get overly analysis paralysis about, I don't know this, I haven't read enough, I need to take a class. Like, I'm a big fan of books, but if you're really interested, I totally agree with what you said. Just get out there and start doing something. Like, get some experience. And it doesn't matter if you do good, you do great, you don't do good, you just learn as you go, and it's fine.
Any other questions? Yes.
So you mentioned a big part of being on a nonprofit board is fundraising and getting sponsorships. That's been my experience in serving at a professionals network. What advice do you have for doing that? And also, if you have any advice of what not to, because sometimes it can be kind of awkward to ask your employer and you don't want to maybe cross any boundaries or ask the wrong person per se.
Great question. Jill, can you start us off?
I want to get clear what you're saying. When you say what not to do, you mean about approaching people?
Right.
To-
You never want to kind of compromise a relationship or
Yeah.
ask for too much is sometimes.
Yeah, I think my advice about that is be upfront. Don't like start a relationship or a conversation and then go in the back door with what it is you're coming there. Go right in the front door. I represent this organization. Here's why I love them. Here's what we're trying to do with our mission. We are raising funds for this, and I would love to talk to you about that. Like, don't go to lunch and then wait till the end of lunch and then, jigsaw somebody with the checkbook thing. Tell them right up front what you're doing.
Well, and I think it kind of goes back to being passionate, whatever it is that you're raising the money for. If you're not passionate about it, like, maybe let somebody else do the ask. Because if you're passionate about it and you believe in it, obviously it's going to be so much easier because it's not about you. It's not about your relationship with the person. It's about whatever this thing is that's really important to be funded. And if you can kind of separate yourself from a little bit that way by making it about the thing that you love, not you, I find that helps a lot.
I would just say this, if you're not passionate about it, you should probably reconsider sitting on that board and asking someone for money. And I agree with everything that you're saying, because I find that people give to people, and so I will often go to the same people for various causes, but I am passionate about those causes. And so because I'm passionate, I'm authentic in my ask. But as Jill said, I'm also letting them know up front that I am coming with an ask.
There really are 3 levels of giving, and I think one is sort of the entry level, if you will. Your Emory alums, I suspect that the donor function here focuses on Emory alums that are recent graduates just because of participation. It's not so important the size of your check, but it's about participation. Then we skip over to the top level, those perennial, loyal, very successful Emory alums who give real sort of needle-moving kind of gifts, $1 million a year or whatever. The middle is the hardest part, and it's the one that requires the most careful attention because, and this will be true at Emory, if there's anybody from the development department here, I apologize if I'm saying something inconsistent with you. Moving people from the participation level to the meaningful gift level is a difficult conversation. Not difficult in that it's not received well, but you've got to get somebody who's gotten comfortable with $100 a year to understand that the expectation now is $2,000 a year, or whatever the number might be. And that's part of what you have to think about. And well, I've done a lot of fundraising for the Woodruff Arts Center. I serve on that board. And one of the things I do is, again, exactly as Marquetta said, and Jill, be very straightforward. We appreciate the consistency of your gift. We're wondering if you are at a place in your life where you could move to become one of our more significant donors. And I'd like to talk to you about that. And if it's not this year, maybe it could be next year. So you do it in that kind of very direct way. So you have to kind of think about your market. The guy who gives $1 million year in and year out, or the gal who does that, that's an easy conversation, oddly enough.
I think we may have time for about one more question. Well, if we don't have one, I will ask, and I hate to end on this note, but I think it's very necessary. So we know that serving on boards really represents an extraordinary impact to give back, but that's also a big task, and with big tasks, there are challenges. What are some of the challenges that you have experienced in serving on boards?
I would say probably overall the biggest challenge is staying at that governance level. I know this is a thing that you'll be helping me with when I go on to the DeKalb County School Board, is that you're there to be strategic and visionary, and you're not there to micromanage, and the executive director needs to be able to do his or her job without you interfering, and it is really hard for boards to back off and let that happen and stay at that governance level. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge and the one I anticipate probably going into my next job.
So I'll probably go a different direction. And as a head of human resources for many, many years in many large companies, people did not show up in my office because they couldn't figure out a new strategy for the business or a new technology implementation or those things. They came in my office because people can't figure out how to get along with people, right? And so, in fact, there's this guy who's all over podcasts now and all this stuff, and he's being called the new Einstein, like the current contemporary Einstein. He's got 450 patents. And they asked him on this podcast, what's the biggest, and he works with companies around innovation. They said, what's the biggest impediment to innovation? He said, the inability of people to work collectively to innovate together. So what I would say, the biggest challenge when you go into a board is recognize that because you have a passion that's shared, doesn't mean the interpersonal challenges in that board are gonna go away and it's just gonna be la, 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 la every time you get. You have to understand how to interact with people, how to disagree in an appropriate and effective way, how how to keep the focus and energy in the room positive when you have disagreements. So I think some of that challenge is just, again, go into that, deciding who do you want to be on that board and in that room. How do you want to show up regardless of the passion or the personalities of other people? And then go in strong, be that person, make a contribution, leave the conflicts on the table or with the people that have them, and go out as strong as you went in, and keep enjoying what you're doing and keep moving that needle down the field. Keep your eye on the prize, not on the personalities and, you know, whatever going on in the room.
So I've had a number of difficult and tense situations, like firing a CEO at 3 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and situations where I had CFOs with their hand in the till or hand on somebody's knee. So I had a lot of different sort of difficult situations, but I think the one that we're focusing on, and I think it's important, is within the boardroom itself, the sort of, if you will, the social dynamic. Women are actually, I think, better at this than men are, but so here's my theme. Lots of people end up on boards because they are at the top of their careers. They're CEOs, they're very accomplished people, and they're accustomed to a hierarchy, which is, I'm telling you what to do, and I'm telling you what to do, and I'm telling you what to do. But in a boardroom, they are just one among equals. And that adjustment is often quite hard, all right? And that adjustment often comes, not often, can sometimes come at the expense of that particular person stepping on the voice of another person. In one of my board service situations, I served on a committee with another fella who was very soft-spoken. He just talked like this. And so it was often the case that he would say something and people go barreling on ahead of him, right over him. And so I became the mic whisperer. And so I would say, well, you may have missed this, but Mike has a point to say, and I'd like to give the room to Mike for a few minutes. And then Mike would pick up and offer up a brilliant point. I love using that example because we tend to expect that example applies in a different way gender-wise, right? That it's the woman's voice that gets stepped on. In this particular instance, I didn't really use humor with it. I just bided my time and helped Mike out, and as you can probably tell, I'm not afraid to speak up. But sometimes this does happen, and the issue will become, in a room of equals where your voice is getting squelched one way or the other, what are you going to do about that? My suggestion to you is don't let it eat at you until you boil over. Address it pretty quickly and do it in a way that's comfortable for you, but for me that's always been to use humor. The line that I tend to quote is the one that comes out of the recent Churchill movie, which is, "Do not interrupt me while I am interrupting you," right? And that will sometimes create a certain degree of levity, but you've made your point. And that's something that I think is important, is in a boardroom, you're gonna need to present with authority. If you're new to the board, it's okay to say, my aim here is to listen and to absorb initially. That's fine, because you don't want to get out over your skis. I don't know how many metaphors I've just used, but the key though is that when you do speak with calm and friendly authority. It's tremendously important. You don't work for any of those people around that table, all right? They are your peers, and I don't want you to forget that.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of these ladies, I speak for all of them, we thank you for your time and your attentiveness. And as Jill just said, go serve, be great. There are lots of great causes and lots of missions that need you. Thank you.